Good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. It's a pleasure to be back regularly worshiping with you again. As many of you know, my wife and I welcomed our first child, a daughter, 2 months ago today. Thank you. Yep. And we were very grateful to finally be back in the routine of being with you and worshiping God together with you. It is a blessing and a pleasure that we're grateful for. I think it's fair to say that we have a complicated relationship with the concept of truth. The truth is hard to take. The truth is out there. The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free is an idea that we really like, and it's from the passage that we'll be discussing today, but it's been co-opted and appropriated by people of all different sorts of backgrounds and beliefs. It's actually, the truth will set you free is engraven on the floor in the foyer of the CIA. It's emblazoned on conspiracy theory websites in yellow Comic Sans font. And it's an idea that we like, though. It's one that is very appealing. It's appealing to all different kinds of people. But it's something that Jesus said. We're going to look at what he meant by that today. But the truth is something that, again, we have an odd relationship with. It's something we often deploy to cover up our rudeness. Listen, I don't know how to say what I'm feeling, so I'm just going to say, the truth is, or I'm just being honest, I don't want to be here. As if deploying the truth makes us not rude. No, it's not rude if I'm being honest. I'm just saying the truth. Sometimes we confuse facts and the truth, facts and figures and statistics. You can choose your political issue of the day, whether it's healthcare or gun control or immigration. We have facts and statistics more than we could even remember and know, and yet the truth, the solution to these problems, evades us. It eludes us. We can't agree on what it is. There's a distinction to be made between truth and facts. Facts are knowledge, the things that we know. 2 + 2 is 4 is a helpful fact, but it's not a meaningful truth in the way that Jesus is talking about truth. No, truth for Jesus is more than simply a fact. We're going to see how that plays out in John 8, verses 31 through 59 this morning. We're going to read up to verse 33. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are offspring of Abraham, and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free?" These first few verses summarize the entirety of the passage that we're going to be looking at this morning. And so let's just put this in context here. What has just happened, these Jews who believe him, essentially Jesus has been having an argument with the Pharisees, an argument about Jesus' authority. Is Jesus who he says he is? Can Jesus make the kinds of claims and do the kinds of things that he does? The Pharisees desperately want to say, no, you can't, Jesus. You don't have the authority to do these things. And so they have this argument. And Jesus defeats them. Jesus is often described as someone who speaks with authority. It says that the people would marvel at him because he taught with authority and not like their teachers of the law. That was one of the things that distinguished Jesus so much from the Pharisees, is that he was convincing. And so he defeats the Pharisees in verses 12 through 30 in an argument about his authority. And it says in verse 30, as he was saying these things, many believed in him. And then in 31, he says to those people who have believed him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Again, the truth will set you free. That's an idea that we really like. It seems really positive. And when we use it, it's always in a positive context. And yet, we lost them. And yet, the response of the Jews is negative. Whoa, hold up. We are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? The Jews are the character in the series that we're doing, that we're going to be looking at this morning. Who are these people? They're distinct from the Pharisees. These are not the Pharisees. The Pharisees are described distinctly in verses 12 to 30, and Jesus has an argument with them. He wins the argument, and these people, the Jews who are there witnessing this, who are following Jesus' argument, who are tracking with him, they're the ones who appear in verses 31 to 33, and for the rest of the chapter as well. It's not fair to say that the Jews here are representative of all of Israel, or all Jewish people. No, these are a particular group, and they're a group that's mentioned a few times. When John talks about the Jews as a distinct group from the Pharisees or the teachers or just the crowds or the people, he's probably talking about people who are a little bit higher up in society. Not teachers, not the Pharisees or the scribes, but people who have some clout. People who are interested in religious dialogue, interested in truth, who are, in many ways, disciples of the Pharisees, and yet are eager to see them challenged and excited to receive a new message. And so what is it, though? What is it about Jesus' statement that they object to? It's this idea that they say, we have never been enslaved to anyone, which, again, is odd if you know the history of the Jewish people. Yes, right? No, that's their entire identity. What God has accomplished for them. If we continue to read the psalm from the passage earlier, it would go on to sing about God's deliverance of his people from Egypt. And it's actually very, very long, which is why we didn't read the entire thing. It's an incredibly huge part of who they are. And so when they say, we've never been enslaved to anyone, what are they talking about? Even while they say that, Israel is occupied by Rome. And so it's clear that they understand that this conversation is not about political, social, or economic freedom and liberty. This is a spiritual conversation. And for Jesus to say that he will set these people free in a spiritual sense is unacceptable. So it's fair to say when they that they believed him as they were, again, tracking with his argument up until this point. And we're going to see as we follow the text that this argument escalates. And Jesus will go a step further and a step further, and the people will become more frustrated. They will object more strongly until finally, in verse 59, we'll see that they are ready to kill Jesus. We're going to see how lies enslave us, blind us to the truth, and prevent us from hearing Jesus' words. Before we continue and read the rest of the text, when Jesus says, you will know the truth, there is no question about what he's talking about. In the Gospel of John, it is extremely clear what the truth is. The themes in the Gospel of John are very consistent, and they repeat. And you may even notice in our sermons that we end up repeating some similar ideas. Or I'm going to repeat one from last week today. No, the truth is the gospel. Now, John is very clear about this. John 3:16 is one of the most well-known verses because it so well encapsulates the gospel, that God loved the world, that he gave his son. That is what Jesus is talking about. That is the message that Jesus has proclaimed. That is the truth. We will continue to explore that more, but let's read now, starting in verse 34. Jesus answered them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed. I know that you are offspring of Abraham, Yet you seek to kill me, because my word finds no place in you. I speak of what I have seen with my Father, and you do what you have heard from your father. So if we're asking the question, well, what is freedom? Jesus, again, very clearly says, freedom from sin, because you who practice sin are slaves to sin. And that idea, which was implicit before, is now extremely explicit. This is what the Jews are objecting to. Jesus is saying, I know that you are offspring of Abraham. Your ethnic identity, your national identity is without question. You're Jews. Abraham is your father. But I'm saying, you who practice sin are slaves to sin. And so they answer Jesus, Abraham is our father, repeating again, no, Abraham is our father. And Jesus says to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would be doing the works Abraham did. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth that I heard from God. This is not what Abraham did. You are doing the works your father did. That's twice now Jesus has made an oblique reference to the Jews' father, who apparently isn't Abraham. Right? What Jesus is saying will become clearer in a moment. And here we start to see, though, the escalation of this argument and the conflict. We were not born of sexual immorality. We have one Father, even God. On the one hand, they're attacking Jesus' authority, just as the Pharisees did. Jesus, we know that Joseph is not your father. You're not even legitimate. Who are you to tell us that we're enslaved, that we need to be free? Who are you to say that you are the one who can free us? No, our Father is God. When we say that we're sons and daughters of Abraham, that means we're sons and daughters of God. Don't you know the Psalms? I think it's fair to say that they would have known the psalm that we read from this morning. The Psalms were the worship and prayer book of the Jewish people. And when they would read that psalm, it sings about God's covenant and his faithfulness with his people. The covenant he made with Abraham. And so what Jesus is doing is he's deconstructing their understanding of themselves. He's taking away their identity. He's poking them. He's prodding them. Jesus continues, no, if God were your father, you would love me. For I came from God, and I am here. I came not of my own accord, but he sent me. Why do you not understand what I say? It is because you cannot bear to hear my word. And why can they not bear to hear his word? Because Jesus says, you are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. But because I tell the truth, you do not believe me. Which one of you convicts me of sin? If I tell the truth, why do you not believe me? Whoever is of God hears the words of God. The reason why you do not hear them is that you are not of God. When Jesus says in verse 32, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free, implicit in that statement is this statement. The reason why you do not hear is that you are not of God. And John 3:16 continues to 17 and 18 to say that Jesus didn't come to condemn the world, because the world was already condemned. And Jesus doesn't lead here with condemnation. No, he leads with an offer of truth and freedom. But his offer necessarily implies that these people are not right with God, that they are slaves to sin, and that they need someone. They need Jesus to set them free. Are we any different? This verse 44, where Jesus so harshly criticizes these people, to go so far as to say that they're children of Satan, has a tragic history, has been used to justify anti-Semitism. But this is not the state of the Jews. This is the state of humanity. That in our slavery to sin, we believe lies. It says that he speaks of his own character. You could say here that Satan, he speaks the language of lies. And we believe lies. We become deceived, become confused. I said we have an interesting relationship with the truth. Often we can't even know what the truth is because we're so deluded and confused and frustrated in our own minds and in our own souls. We and the situation of our world is no different than the situation that Jesus is confronting with these Jewish people. But they're not done with him yet. They'll continue to say, "You're a Samaritan, Jesus. You're not even a Jew. You have a demon. You're possessed. You're not even in your right mind. You're not Jewish. You're illegitimate. You're demon-possessed. You're a lunatic." This word that Jesus has for them is so unacceptable. We're not going to read all of the rest of this here. But we'll go on to see what Jesus has to say to conclude this argument. First of all, he says that my glory is nothing. It is my Father who glorifies me. And then he goes on to say that Abraham, your father, saw this day. Abraham knew that he and his people needed a Messiah, and that was part of God's covenant and promise. He rejoiced that you would see my day. He was glad. And finally, Jesus says to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am." And so they pick up stones to throw at him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple. The conversation escalates on both sides. Jesus becoming more explicit, more pointed. The people becoming angrier and more hostile. Finally, to the point of violence. Jesus to the point of explicitly telling them that he is God himself. When Jesus says, "If you abide in my word," he could just as easily have said, "If you abide in me." When Jesus said, "You will know the truth," he could just as easily have said, "You will know me, and I will set you free." The truth is more than a fact for Jesus. The truth is more than something we can write down and memorize. The truth is a person. The truth is Jesus. And we can know the truth because it is Jesus. The same way we can know a person, a truth that can be loved and can love the way a person can. More than a fact, more than an idea. God himself made flesh. The truth is Jesus himself. Now, the lie that these people believed, the lie was that their ethnic and national identity, the fact that they were descendants of Abraham, made them spiritually right with God. And that they needed nothing else outside of themselves to be free. But we're no different. What kinds of lies, what kinds of deceptions do we give ourselves? Does our culture give itself? Does our world give itself? So that it doesn't have to accept Jesus' message that, indeed, if we need to be set free, we are actually slaves, and that we are slaves to sin. What are the shadows that are blinding us from Jesus' light? What kinds of deceptions are we tempted by? And here we're going to return to two ideas that Derek talked about last week. Because these are the ideas that Jesus confronts. And they're ideas that are as old as humanity, and yet are still with us now. And it's legalism and lawlessness. Legalism, this idea that we, through our discipline and our virtue, can redeem ourselves, can redeem our world, can make ourselves right with God, if we even believe that God exists and needs to be made right with. And lawlessness, freedom, the idea that the truth, whether it's out there or not, doesn't really matter, because the truest truth is what you find in yourself, who you are as a person, your dreams and your desires. And if you know those things better, well, then you know the truth, and that is enough. That's as good as it's going to get. That's freedom. So can we find freedom in discipline and virtue? Can we find freedom in and of ourselves? I want to look at, there's two personalities right now who have received some media attention, who are famous in their own right, who both articulate this kind of idea. And I bring these people up not necessarily to criticize them as individuals, but to illustrate these ideas of lawlessness and legalism. So my two examples are Oprah Winfrey and a man named Jordan Peterson. You're probably familiar with Oprah, of course. She's an entertainment juggernaut. She stars in A Wrinkle in Time, which just premiered this weekend. Her speech at the Golden Globes was viewed over 10 million times on YouTube alone. Of course, that pales in comparison to how many people have watched her shows and read the books she's recommended. So Oprah has become more than just a talk show host and an interviewer and a journalist. But on her website and on her shows, she talks about spiritual things, and she even presents herself as a spiritual leader. She takes this idea that the truth is inside of you, and that being true to yourself is the ultimate truth, and she expounds upon it in a spiritual way, drawing from The Secret and Deepak Chopra and other New Age spiritual ideas. You can watch essentially a testimony video that she has on her website, where she talks about knowing the importance of inner truth, speaking into being, and the power that there is in the universe. And so, to summarize all that up, as it's complicated and sometimes nebulous, and what Oprah and what this idea really is that the universe is for you. And so abide in positivity. Find truth in yourself. Accept it for what it is. Abide in yourself and in positivity, because ultimately that is what's going to give you freedom. Is going to affirm you in your purpose. On the other end of the spectrum, Jordan Peterson is a psychologist at the University of Toronto. He's been very popular on YouTube recently, videos getting up to 40 million views, and he recently published a book called 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote for Chaos, premiered as the #1 best-selling nonfiction ebook on Amazon. And Peterson, like Oprah, actually comes from a Christian background. So one of the things that's interesting about both of these people is they will often use Christian spiritual language to describe what they're talking about, though neither of them holds to what we would consider an orthodox understanding of the Christian faith. Peterson says that Christian faith was something shallow and wishful thinking that he inevitably grew out of, but at the same time, he thinks that the ideas of Christianity are fundamental to the success of our history, and so there must be some value in them. He says at one point, when he was being plagued with doubt, he was searching for something on which to build his house. Those are the words he uses. It's almost as if he knows what he's saying. Of course, he doesn't find that rock in Jesus. What Peterson says is that the most I can say about the world is that evil exists. He feels like that is a certainty. And so if evil exists, then good must also exist, and we must seek after it through self-discipline, virtue, conservative values, and that in those things, in small ways, reducing the chaos in the world, we will find freedom and truth and meaning. Peterson says, if you act properly, your actions will allow you to be psychologically integrated. Everything will come together. Everything will stack up in a line on a single axis, and this produces maximal meaning. So if you wanted to sum up this idea, and again, this is not unique to Peterson, the universe is brutal and cruel, so abide in virtue. Perhaps you find something appealing about each of those ideas. Certainly millions of people do. As Oprah's videos and television shows are extremely popular, and Peterson has had incredible success recently, especially with his new book. And again, I'm not telling you that these are terrible, awful people who you shouldn't follow or listen to. If you are excited about seeing A Wrinkle in Time, be excited about that. If you've read Peterson's book and you found parts of it useful, good. But these ideas that are at the bottom here, that are not unique to them, that are part of human history, that are very attractive and very interesting, and that often even seem very similar to our own Christian faith. When we see Jesus condemning the Pharisees for their rigorous purity laws, for their unfair restrictions on their people, we say, yes, freedom. These rules are ridiculous. The people shouldn't have to follow them. And at the same time, when we read the Sermon on the Mount, we see that Jesus has a very strong understanding of ethics and the law, and he demands that we seek to follow that. He says that he'll give us the power to do that. Indeed, living a disciplined life is part of being a Christian. There's an idea in language. It's called, if you've studied another language in high school, you might have heard about a false cognate. And a word in another language that it sounds just like a word in ours, but it means something completely different. And in our own language, when you're looking at older English versus newer English, there's an idea of the false friend. It's a word that is the same, spelled the same, pronounced the same, but over the past few hundred years, the meaning is completely changed. And there are many false friends out there in the world, ideas that are appealing and that often maybe even seem to align with the gospel. But there are problems with these ideas. The first, a quote from N.T. Wright, talking about looking inside of ourselves for truth, reflecting on Jesus' argument with the Pharisees over purity laws. N.T. Wright says that we cannot isolate one part of our human makeup and blame it for evil. We can't suggest that getting in touch with our truest feelings will sort us out. What if the feelings that most truly express who we currently are turn out to be murderous, adulterous, envious, and the rest? The fact that they are there in our hearts does not mean they are thereby validated. On the contrary, it means we have a problem that runs right through us. There is a crack in the building. Again, we can search inside of ourselves, but our desires change. Our hopes change and fluctuate with circumstance and events. People change dramatically over the course of a few years and even more over the course of a decade. If you search for truth inside yourself, you're never going to find the same thing twice. And you're always going to find the stain of sin. On the other hand, to the path of rigorous virtue and legalism, there it is. On the path of having far too many pieces of paper. C.S. Lewis says that pride can often be used to beat down the simpler vices. Teachers, in fact, often appeal to a boy's pride, or as they call it, his self-respect, to make him behave decently. And many a man has overcome cowardice or lust or ill temper by learning to think that they are beneath his dignity, that is, by pride. The devil laughs. He is perfectly content to see you becoming chaste and brave and self-controlled, provided all the time he is setting up in you the dictatorship of pride. Just as he would be quite content to see your ills cured if he was allowed in return to give you cancer. For pride is spiritual cancer. It eats up the very possibility of love or contentment or even common sense. Derek told us last week, we're tempted to swing on a pendulum from freedom to legalism, to one side to the other. But Jesus is telling us the gospel isn't in the center. It's not even on the same scale. We're talking about something else completely. No, we, as the gospel says, are sinners. And as Jesus says, we are slaves to sin, estranged from God. And we are in desperate need of something outside of ourselves because we cannot find a truth that frees us inside of us, and we cannot create freedom through our virtue and our discipline. Jesus says, if you abide in my word, you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You will truly be my disciples. Freedom. Again, Jesus isn't talking about economic, social, or political freedom. He's not talking about liberty the way we as Americans think of freedom. No, Jesus is talking about something else, and it's expressed in John chapter 1. But to all who did receive him, for those who believed in Jesus, in his name, he gave the right to become children of God, who were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. Freedom is freedom from sin, but it is freedom to be a child of God. Jesus is giving you a right which you do not have and which you cannot gain apart from him. That is what his freedom means, and what it looks like is exactly what we've been singing about and reflecting on this morning. What John David said earlier, that we are champions. We reflected on as we asked Laura what she'll be doing this time tomorrow. That we can be assured that what we're doing this time tomorrow, no matter how mundane or difficult it is, it matters to God because we are his child, his son, his daughter, his beloved. Because Jesus has accomplished what we could not. He lived the moral, righteous life that we always fail at. And he offers the freedom that we can find in no one else. That is his gospel message for us. That is what he died to accomplish. If you were able to join us on Friday night over at Christ the Redeemer to hear Scott Saul share about befriending and sharing love in the community of the church, he said something that struck me and just was so encapsulating of this idea of finding freedom in Jesus. Jesus' last words on the cross are the first words of your new life as a believer. It is finished. The work is already finished. And so you do not have to prove yourself through your vigorous discipline and moral life. And you do not have to search inside of yourself to find truth and freedom. Because truth is a person, and that person is Jesus. And we can know the truth because Jesus has revealed it to us. The people who are living in darkness have seen a great light. A light that casts out sin and lies and death. That is the gospel that Jesus preached. That is what Jesus is trying to convince these people of. Jesus says in the Gospel of John that until you see the Son of Man lifted up, you will not understand these things. But when Jesus died for these people, many truly believed and were saved. I want to close with an illustration from the life of Billy Graham. I'm sure you've probably read quite a few tributes and articles about Graham's life as he passed away earlier or late last month. And there was one that I found quite striking. And now as his death as weeks have passed, where once there were almost only positive articles, now there are many more that are criticizing or wondering, how valuable was he to America? Where were his faults? And certainly it is important for us to acknowledge that Billy Graham was a human being and that he was a sinner in need of the gospel that he preached. And he was very aware of that. And John Perkins writes about a conversation that he had with Billy Graham. I remember Billy telling me he regretted not doing more to remove the ropes of racism. He repented and asked for my forgiveness. Even though he had done so much, Billy had humility, and I admire him for this. Billy understood God's power to forgive sin and to reconcile all men to himself. The simplicity of Billy Graham's mission is perhaps what impacted me most. He preached the gospel, and he trusted the Holy Spirit to convict people's hearts. Billy Graham abided in Jesus' words, and to abide means to remain. Remaining in Jesus' words will often confront you with hard truths, just as the Jews experienced in this chapter that we've reflected on. And even Billy Graham was confronted with the hard truth that he did not, in his own opinion, do enough to combat racism in the church and in our country. But if you're living and putting your hope in your virtuous life, this kind of realization will crush you, will end you. But Billy did not put his faith and his trust in the virtuous life because he didn't live one. No, he lived a gospel life. He was a humble servant of God. And so he could repent. He had the freedom to ask for forgiveness and to receive it. That is the freedom that Jesus offers, to be a child of God, to self-disclose, to say, this is who I am, this is the sins that I've committed, these are the hopes and dreams that I have. Jesus, help me, forgive me, show me what it means to be free. Let us pray together. Jesus, you are the truth. The Word became flesh, God incarnate. Lord, the truth is elusive and frustrating, and yet it is encapsulated in your body, in your person. And Lord, we can know it because we can know you. And Lord, what you have done for us in your death and your resurrection has bought us costly freedom. Freedom from a life of moralism that would crush us. And freedom from ourselves and our sinfulness, our inconsistencies. Lord, you love us. You give those who believe the right to be your children. Lord, I pray that we would live in that truth and find freedom in knowing that you are our loving Father.